Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Joel Clark for an episode of Wuxia Workshop, and we are talking about Brave Archer 2. This is the sequel to Brave Archer, and it's directed by Chang Cheh. It's a 1978 film, and it's an attempt to put the classic Louis Cha story, Legend of Condor heroes, also known as Eagle Shooting Heroes, onto the big screen. And, it takes certain liberties because of time constraints. But I quite enjoy this version, and I think that it's a good introduction to a lot of the source material. And so Joel and I have been delving into this. It's interesting also because it's a trilogy, and it stars Alexander Fusheng as Guo Jing, and so over at Wuxia Weekend we're doing the Alexander Fusheng month, so it kind of pairs nicely with what we already have going on Friday. So before we get into the plot and all of that, Joel, what was your reaction to the second movie? Was it as enjoyable as the first? Did you find this to be a dip?
Yeah, this was enjoyable as the first, and actually it kind of had an Avengers vibe to it, since it had already introduced a bunch of characters in the last one and introduced new ones in this one. There was a few shots that were kind of like Avengers money shots, where it's clear the audience was supposed to know, oh, look at this guy, it's the fist guy with the cape, he's showing up now, oh, it's the beggar sect.
Are you thinking of the scene when the leader of Iron Palm sect is sort of standing in the wind as he's doing his palm technique? Yeah.
Yeah, got the cape going, it was awesome.
Yeah. And I should mention before we continue that Joel's on dad duty tonight, so there may be some sounds in the background, but what we may end up doing is, when the sounds become too much, we'll cut and then we'll resume. So if you hear stopping and starting, that's the reason. But we're going to try to minimize that, so you may still hear some noise. So I'm sorry, Joel, go on.
No, that's fine. That's a pretty accurate assessment. I'm on dad duty. It is school tomorrow, so this is going to be a little more cleared up. But you're going to hear some cackling and thumping from the background. And if that turns into shrieks, then I'm going to have to go and dad for a minute. But yeah, that's what's going on there.
But yeah, so I'm sorry. Continue with just your reaction.
Okay, yeah, my reaction. Sorry, got two things going on. That's far too many for a father. All right, okay, so it was really cool, and there are a lot of things, again, sort of structurally about this movie that were really nifty. Like you and I, before we started the podcast here, we're talking about how they head to this dilapidated inn, and apparently a lot of stuff that happened to that inn happened in other places in the Condor Shooting Heroes. And so the filmmakers, when they were creating this, just kind of use that as a sort of a locational node for all of these different characters and sects to come in and do the things they did in the novel. And it really works, because there's a linchpin to the middle of that where Guo Jing is wounded, and him and Huanrong are both using this technique to heal him, but it requires them to stay there with their palms linked for 7 solid days. So they're basically just watching out of this little peephole as all this stuff goes on, and they keep it's almost comedic, because Guo Jing keeps going for his sword, oh, we gotta intervene, because he's such a impulsive hero, and she's like, no, you idiot, you're almost healed, just calm down. So that's a lot of fun.
And it puts a lot of time. I mean, it really, the stakes are high because they can't be interrupted. So there's all these. They're not just watching these things. There are these things that they kind of almost need to intercede in. Bad things are happening, and they can't really do much about them. And so it just is it's one of the more classic moments in the story and in the movies and in the series. But yeah, and I think just to give people, I guess, a breakdown of the plot in this movie. This follows the where we ended in Brave Archer. It has a little segment that kind of is like a concise narration of a bunch of events that occurred, where we learn that the master of Peach Blossom Island, Huang Yaoshi, is upset at Guo Jing and kicks him off the island because he learns that Zhu Batong had taught him to memorize the words beforehand, and he ends up leaving on a boat, and through a sort of elaborate series of events, trapped on an island where he has to contend with Ouyang Feng, and so it's him, the leader of Beggar Sect, and Huang Rong dealing with Ouyang Feng and Ouyang Ke. And Ouyang Feng basically is kidnapped Huang Rong and is willing to exchange her in exchange for the 9 Yin manual, which Guo Jing has in his head. And so the beggar chief tells him to just, change things here or there so he has an inaccurate version of it, and that'll do. And so there's a big fight, but the end result of the fight is that Ouyang Feng and Hong Qigong, the leader of Beggar Clan, agree to have a duel at a later date. But as Hong Qigong is walking away, Ouyang Feng just palms him in the back. And
poisons him, really F's him up.
Yep. And so this leads to a whole series of events where Hong Qigong has to. There's this big Beggar Clan meeting coming up, and all the while the Jin are trying to take over the song, and so they want the beggars to go far south and not interfere. And so they're trying to pay off different leaders and things like this. And Hong Qigong needs to go to this meeting so he can sort of rally the beggars against the Jin. And he passes and transmits his techniques to Huang Rong and makes her the 19th beggar chief so that she can go do it on his behalf. However, over the course of the movie, over a course of series of events that occur, Yang Kang ends up obtaining the stick. And the dog beating
falls into his lap, really.
Yeah. He obtains the dog beating stick, and he is able to use that to try to take over the Beggar Clan on behalf of the Jin and get them to go south. And so there's a big final confrontation at the Beggar meeting, and they eventually oust Yang Kang, and Huang Rong and Guo Jing are able to sort of assert control. And then because this master of the Iron Palm sect had arrived, and he was paid by the Jin to sort of, get the beggars to go south. So they follow the lead of the Yu Fei manual at the which they think is an Iron Palm sect, and that's where the movie ends. And the Yu Fei manual is sort of a big plot point over the course of the movie, and I obviously skipped over a heck of a lot of stuff. So in light of that, why don't you what are some of the sequences and scenes that you think are worth commenting on and discussing before we get into sort of the gamification of the sequel to Brave Archer?
Well, much like the last one of these movies, there's a lot of really cool fights, and I think at least a couple of them are extremely cool. Well, even at the very beginning of the movie, where Ouyang Feng and Ouyang Ke are okay. So Guo Jing writes the false manual, and then he escapes with Hong Qigong and Huang Rong, and they're like, "Oh, we gotta get out of here," and they're just immediately ambushed. And okay, so Bear King gets poisoned and injured by this evil kung fu, and then Ouyang Feng, the freaking Western evil, goes after Guo Jing, who is way lower level than him, and they're fighting almost like equals, and it's clear that there's an imbalance of power and skill, but in a twist of uncharacteristic cunning, I guess, Guo Jing jumps on top of a boulder and uses kung fu to break it. And although Ouyang Feng is able to move it away from himself, it falls on Ke's legs and breaks them, and they remain broken for the rest of the movie. He doesn't even walk the rest of the movie. He hobbles on crutches.
Yep.
And that's great. I love that. There were so many cool things that happened in that scene.
No, I also just like how just evil Ouyang Feng was. Just the whole thing. The whole thing where he hits Hong Qigong in the back, and in this kind of setting, that's not a minor thing. They had agreed, especially in Louis Cha books, this whole thing where you agree to fight at a later date at an appointed time, that is a really big point of for lack of a better word, just the honor code among the martial heroes. And so you see characters do this all the time, and usually even the worst people in the world will agree to meet you at a later point and fight with you if that sort of thing is said. And here he just exploits that and poisons them from behind. It's the equivalent of shooting somebody in the back.
Right, it's a real dirty deal kind of move, and like it's a moment of like moral event horizon for Fang, you know, like he's a bastard at that point.
And it's not the last time we see him do something like that. Later on, there's this great battle with the Chuanzhen Taoists and Huang Yaoshi and Mei Chaofeng, and initially, Wu Yongfeng is acting like he is an ally of Huang Yaoshi. And he even appeals to Huang Yaoshi's sense of chivalry, because when they arrive at the scene, the Chuanzhen Taoists are all fighting with Mei Chaofeng, and so it's 7-on-1. And Wu Yongfeng is like, oh, like, they're bullying a woman, like 7-on-1. And
bullying a blind woman,
a blind woman. And so, but Wu Yongfeng ends up, trying to attack Huang Yaoshi during the battle, and Mei Chaofeng, jumps in between them and sacrifices herself. And it's a really great scene. Number one, because Mei Chaofeng, her character, has been kicked out of Peach Blossom Island sect, and Huang Yaoshi is the master. And you can tell she desperately wants to return to the fold, but she stole a manual. She's done all these horrible things. He crippled a bunch of people in the wake of her stealing the manual. You catch glimpses of this throughout the whole story, and so it's just really a nice sense of completion for the character when she's able to block the attack from Wu Yongfeng and then be accepted in before she dies like that. And I think her last act is to bow. She kowtows to him. So
yes, a surprisingly heroic end to what I thought was going to be a much more diabolical character, but no, she has a really chivalrous end. That's another kind of thing about Huang Yaoshi. I've got quite a man crush on Huang Yaoshi. That guy is amazing. Master of Peach Blossom Island. He's got cool magic. He is this dapper scholar fellow. He's such a badass. And he will make you married to someone. That's the thing he will do to you.
Yeah, he's very good at. He's a very good matchmaker. We discover, and he's a very interesting figure. And you learn a lot more about him, I feel, in the Return of Condor Heroes story, because he has a pretty big role in that book too. So you want to pay attention to characters like Wu Yongfeng and Huang Yaoshi, because they become very important in the sequel, Return of Condor Heroes. Are there any other scenes before we move into the gamification that you think are important and worthy of comment? Ouyang Ke dies in this movie, and I wasn't anticipating that because he's such a freaking badass. Also, he was wounded in the first scene, and I thought that was going to pay dividends for a while longer, and it does all the way up until he dies, but he gets killed. And it happens in a really interesting way, because so he winds up at that inn after Guojing has been injured, and he's seriously hurt, and he's got a technique for healing himself, but it requires him and Huang Rong to basically hold hands for a week and pass their chi back and forth to heal him. And they can't talk to anyone else, and they're just stuck. So they go into this little secret room, close the door, and they're like, okay, we're safe, we got 7 days, no problem. And just this parade of awful stuff happens outside their room. One of those things is that Ouyang Ke just goes nuts at one point, and he figures out where they are, and there's these unrelated heroes that wander in, which again are probably really important in the broader story of Condor Heroes, but I don't know who they are. They just wander the heck in, and he starts tormenting them and I'm gonna kill these guys. You're gonna watch them die unless you come out here and save me. And who shows up but Yang Kong, who's just threaten to kill them. I mean, he threatens to really
demean them and all this horrible stuff. He's just going full anime bad guy. I don't know if that holds a lot of water with the Wuxia audience, but it's I don't know what it is about anime characters, but they have that same thing in common, that crazy look in their eye, where they're I'm not just gonna be evil, I'm gonna be so evil it's kind of sickening. And that's what he had going on. And Yang Kong, who was way outmatched by him at this point, by the way, comes in and he's just I brought some wine and food for you. You know, we could just chill out. And he puts his sword on the table, and then he takes the knife he was born with, which has his brother's name on it, and knifes him under the table. And freaking even Ouyang Ke is holding the knife in his stomach, and he's like, I lived my whole life to be killed by a rat like you.
Well, and it's funny too because the scene that reminds me of instantly is the scene where Guo Jing kills Mei Chao Feng's husband in the very beginning, and he says almost the same exact thing. I never thought I'd be like whenever these great masters are killed by a lesser person, it's always I never thought someone like you would kill me. So it's but yeah, I think that scene really emphasizes Yang Kang's cunning and he's got a real sort of sneaky evil about him because number one, he comes back and superficially he's sort of presenting himself as trying to rescue Moon Yanxi, the character played by Kara Hui in this, who is also on the scene. But he has a deeper motive, which is he wants to learn the kung fu of Ouyang Feng. But Ouyang Feng will only train somebody within his family, and he's already made Ouyang Ke his heir. So he thinks by killing Ouyang Ke, he can worm his way into becoming Ouyang Feng's student. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's just like a really devious sort of scheme.
I know. He is super schemy and devious in this movie. He was a very enjoyable character. Because exiting that scene, one of the things that happens is Ouyang Ke is taunting the heroes, and Huang Rong, who has the dog beating stick from the beggar sect for, again, going into some deep territory there, but she loses it, and so whenever Ke's killed, on his way strolling out, Yang Kang's like, cool stick, picks it up, and he's wandering through the town later on, and all the beggars are like, oh, you got the dog beating stick, you must be the new head, and he's like, yeah, I'm that, and he manages to just completely on the fly turn that whole situation to his advantage. Yeah, really cool stuff.
And he just happens to meet Elder Peng, who's one of the sort of a man after his own heart.
Elder Peng's it.
And it's funny how quickly he sneaks up on you with his evil, Elder Peng. At first you don't realize it, and then he's a very I don't know, very very interesting character. But yeah, so I mean, obviously that's it. And I have some information that might kind of blow your mind because I don't think it's in the movie. Maybe it was, and I didn't notice it, but I know it's in the book, which is
I probably overlooked it. So
Ouyang Ke is the son of Ouyang Feng.
Really?
Yeah. He believes that he's Ouyang Feng's nephew, but we learn later on in the book that he's actually his son because Ouyang Feng had an affair with his sister-in-law or something.
I get you.
So that's why.
But
that's why he's it's a significant plot point when Ouyang Ke dies and Ouyang Feng is kind of like, hey, where's my nephew? But yeah, so I don't know, any other key scenes that you wanted to raise?
The only other one I wanted to talk about was the very ending scene where Captain Fistomancer shows up to punch people. And I'm also going to talk about it in relation to RPG stuff because it's neat that he comes in, he's introduced in that scene, and within seconds he's established how big of a badass he is, and the ultimate fight of the movie is with him, and it's a good payoff even though he's not been in the movie for more than maybe 12 minutes total. It's a very cool way to introduce mini bosses and things into your campaign. It's a good technique to have, is establish how cool they are right away, so the fight with them, even if it's just right in that same scene, it's something satisfying, and it's kind of an emotional payoff.
Yeah, that's Chi Tron Ren. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but he's the leader of Iron Palm Sect, and it's just it's a really great performance by Lo Meng, and
oh my god, it's a really good performance, and physically he's really intimidating. He's like a living brick.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a reason why he's one of the more popular Venoms. But also this movie is kind of it's an early sampling of you get that many of the Venom actors playing much different roles than you might normally see them in. Like Philip Kwok is Ju Batong, who is another character here. But yeah, that final scene. Well, what was it that you liked about that scene particularly?
Well, there's lots to appreciate in it. Mostly, it's a really nice bow to the whole movie because all the plot threads kind of meet up at the end really nicely. And I commented on that in the last one too, where like in the last scene they managed to tie it all together in a really intense way. Like they've got Guo Jing and Huang Rong tied up. Yang Kong has fooled all the beggar sect into believing that he's the new like beggar king kind of. And then I'm just gonna keep calling him Captain Fistomancer. His name is not in my notes. That he comes in, and as it turns out, he works for the Jin, and he's there to beg the beggar sect, or like bribe the beggar sect to moving south the Yangtze River. And looks like the Prince of the Jin is actually in charge of the beggar sect now. It's wonderful. Like it's great to see the bad guys have all the upper hands, and then like after a few minutes of meditating on the North Star, Guo Jing is like, "Oh, okay, that's what the manual was talking about. I get it now." And he breaks out of his bonds and he starts fighting people along with Huang Rong. And like, there's so much that's like, okay. So earlier on in the movie, Huang Rong gets taught all these different stick techniques by Zhao Botong, and
she gets taught the stick techniques by Hong Qigong. Hong Qigong.
Yeah, Hong Qigong. Yeah, sorry, I was confusing old Naughty.
No, that's okay. I should say here there are a lot of characters in this movie, and so it takes a while to get familiar with all of them.
It does, but they are all very distinct characters. I only mixed up a couple of them, and it's because they wore very plain looking outfits. Mm-hmm. Almost everyone has something very visually distinct about them. They have unique names, unique talents, and a very important and well-defined role in the story. So much like, say, Star Wars has a lot of characters, so does this, and you get to know them.
Well, and speaking of Star Wars, that's one of the things that I always feel at the end of Part 2 is that reminds me so much of Star Wars for some reason. I don't know why. Like, there's like there's just something about the way this one ends. Like, I mean, I know obviously Empire Strikes Back ends with much more of a down note with a wounded hero and all that, which we do get in the sequel to Legend of Condor Heroes. But this one kind of reminds me of I don't know, something about where the plot is in that movie, mm-hmm. where you kind of you have the characters sort of looking towards their next step. Do you know what I mean? Like
structurally, yeah, there's a lot in common because the first Star Wars, or the fourth Star Wars, I guess, has that same thing where it feels like it's a complete story. Then the second one feels like there's more that you're not going to get to see right now. And both of those, if you compare all four of the movies, they both have that same kind of vibe to them. Where in this one, it feels like there's more things in motion that we're going to see soon.
Yeah,
I didn't feel that so much in the first one. The first one felt like we pretty much wrapped it up.
Yes. And now I feel like it's blossomed into a larger world. Like you realize, wow, there's this palm sect that they have to go to now, and who knows what else. Like so it just kind of explodes into this, like this expansion of the setting. So that I guess that's what I'm maybe keying in on. I don't know. Also, just the general vibe of the beggar camp, and just just all of the. I don't know. I just love that scene for some reason. And like you said,
there's a betrayal there, which like Lando kind of betrays him to the Empire, and like the beggars get betrayed. Like there's a lot that like it echoes. I'm with you there.
And one thing that maybe isn't as apparent in the movie, that's more apparent in the books and in the series, is just how big of a betrayal that is. Because in the book, there's just a lot more time for Yang Kong to develop, and for him to be like, he and Guo Jing are sworn brothers by this point. Do you know what I mean? They've had like that, like it's a real betrayal. It's a betrayal of his father. It's a betrayal of to Guo Jing, and that's why there's that scene where in the movie it almost seems like Huang Rong is like very coldly saying, "Let's murder Yang Kong when he least expect it." Do you know what I mean? Like because they see him hesitating. He walks up to the Jin Prince and takes out his dagger a little bit, and it looks like he's going to try to get revenge for his father. Then he puts the dagger back in, and he puts a little sheer gown over the Jin Prince and accepts him as his father. And they're furious that he's accepting this villain as his father.
They're mad.
And Huang Rong especially, and I think largely because the betrayal of Guo Jing. But I mean it's almost like surprising how she's just like, okay, he's weaker than us. He's nowhere near Ouyang Feng. We can kill him anytime we want. We'll just track him down and murder. Like, she doesn't use the word murder, but she basically is saying we're going to track him down and murder him. She does not like him. And that plays out in Return of Condor Heroes in a very cool way, I think. Also, I think
this is so good. I might watch this on my own time. We could talk about it way later down the line.
Yeah, it's and another thing that I did want to kind of dig into again before we go on to the gaming stuff, the whole thing with him, and you just brought it up, and I think we kind of got sidetracked. When Hong Qigong transmits his techniques to her and makes her the new beggar chief, that's such a cool character transformation. Like that. Like, suddenly she, like, it's this development that echoes over the course of all the remaining chapters and in all the and into the next book. And I don't know, I just really like that. It's something like you wouldn't think to do that necessarily somehow. Like, I wouldn't, like, if I were writing the story, I would not have thought, hey, I need to make Huang Rong the leader of Beggar Clan. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's an interesting mix of elements, but when you think about it, Lu Jing meets her as a beggar. She's acting like a beggar at the point. So she's a great candidate when you really consider it, and I think Hong Qigong, like, he sees that in her. It's like, this is where you belong. So very cool. And
it totally is like something that ties back to stuff that she's done earlier in the book. It just wouldn't have occurred to me. It just wouldn't. It would seem like, well, that's a bit like my initial impulse would be, well, that's a bit much to add on to a character who's already well fleshed out.
And I think that the thing is, the storytelling is so masterful that, like everyone else in her life, we're looking at her as the daughter of Huang Yaoshi.
Yeah.
But in her heart, that's not her character, and the author knew that.
And so, that's a whole other thing. I really want to see your reaction to Huang Rong and Guo Jing in the Return of Condor Heroes context, because it's very interesting watching them go from being the protagonists in this story to being kind of like elders or important supporting characters in the sequel.
Intrigued.
We'll have to figure out the best way to do that, because unfortunately there's not as there is Brave Archer and his mate, which is kind of like the unofficial fourth movie of this franchise, and that gets into the beginning of Return of Condor Heroes, and then there's Little Dragon Maiden, but I don't think they're quite as good as introductory material to the source as the Brave Archer is. Do you know what I mean? Like, the Brave Archer
seems to be doing a really good job.
Yeah,
like there's a lot of great stuff in here.
But the alternative is to watch, like, to either read the books or watch a 50-episode TV series. So we might have to settle for, doing the Brave Archer and his mate and Little Dragon Maiden. But,
I don't know, man. I've binge watched a few series here lately. I might be able to. Is it like hour-long episodes, or is it like
they're hour-long, and here's the thing. I mean, depending on how quick you read, you might be better off just reading the book. I don't know. Like, I did a read through of the book last year, and I did an overview of the whole series last year, episode by episode with Adam, and I think it took me just as long to do both. So, because each episode is an hour, and each episode is basically a chapter in the book. The chapters are kind of long, so I don't know exactly if it lines up exactly, but I mean, it's pretty close. Like, you're looking at like 50 hours of viewing material, if you're watching the series.
The last one I binge watched was Twin Peaks. I think it's only like 40 episodes, but it took me a few weeks to hobble through it. You got a life to live. You can't just sit there watching TV all day.
And I don't remember the exact number. It might be anywhere between 42 and 50 or something like that. But I mean, that's the general, and the books are 40 chapters each. So divided into 4 volumes usually. But yeah, so I don't know, any other topics before we dive into the gaming thing?
I think we nailed it.
All right. So on the gaming, I guess the first thought I had was unusual hooks in terms of, adventure hooks. And so, like, in this one we get an example where, they have to sneak into the Imperial Palace because Hong Qigong is hungry and wants to eat nice food. And there's absolutely no compelling need for him to go there. aside from something else that's discovered when they arrive. But
that was interesting structurally because he's just like, you know what I want right now? To eat a king's feast. And they're like, well, let's break into the imperial palace and hold the chef hostage and make him cook for you. And they do that, and then while they're there, completely coincidentally, they're like, oh, hey, all those guys that are trying to kill us are also trying to steal this kung fu manual. Let's go stop them. Well, and they just kind of hide him there in the kitchen.
Well, I guess another topic that raises is sort of the scaling of characters in RPGs and in a Wuxia game. If you have characters that have reached the levels of skill that Hong Jigong has and that Zhu Batong and Guo Jing at this point, I mean, they can decide to do something like that. They have enough power that they can say, hey, let's go into the White House and get ourselves a good meal. And who's going to really stop them? As long as they're smart about it. And that's something that is a game master you have to contend with when characters have palm techniques that can shatter the ribs of 40 men.
Oh yeah,
that makes soldiers.
That comes from the palace too, because so it's not as though any of the villains were invited. They came there to steal a manual, and they do. When the palace guards show up, Ouyang Feng does one attack, and all of them fly back. Yeah. And so instead of rushing forward to kill them, they're like, okay, let them leave, and chase after them now to save face because we can't beat them. Yeah,
exactly. So I mean, and that's something that you have to deal with as a GM, or not something you have to deal with. That's something you have to accept as a GM. If you have characters that are walking around with those powers, unless the king has a retinue of guards that are also at that power level, they're going to be able to walk in and storm the palace. What was that?
To put a pin in that, one of the reasons I like the Adventure Conquer King system is because the assumption is the highest level character is the king, so that helps a lot with that.
No, that does make sense, and in a way that's kind of what ends up happening if you allow a role playing game to play itself out naturally.
Yeah,
in a lot of cases, I mean there could be exceptions, but usually the guy with the most power becomes the head honcho.
More or less. And if not in name, then they become the power behind the throne.
Yeah.
It's really rare for me to run a game to high level where the PCs aren't kind of in charge of the setting whenever we leave off.
But the other thing that raises is the prospect of a villainous party, because you have this evil party that goes to the same location as them for other purposes and is sort of their rival, for the first half of the film, it seems. And so I thought that was a cool example of what an evil party might look like. So the other thing that I was thinking was kind of interesting was the idea of inventing abilities beyond the rules. And I guess this is maybe even a point of discussion, because I don't know what your feeling is on this. But there's a moment where Elder Pang hypnotizes Huang Rong. And that immediately struck... Number one, it's a really cool ability for the character to have. But it's an ability that we haven't really seen much of in the setting at this point. So, as a gamer, what it looks like to me, it's almost like if this were a campaign, I imagine the GM saying, I need a guy who can hypnotize, so I'm going to come up with that ability for the character, because most systems are not going to have a hypnosis ability.
That's a very particular ability, yeah. And that was kind of my feeling on it, too. I was like, if that manifested in a game, would that be really cheesy or not? And it is kind of cheesy, but you got to remember a few things about it. Even though it is an overwhelming power, the characters do figure out how to beat it, and they do beat it in a head-to-head combat later on.
Yes.
So it's not like they don't have any way to deal with that. And in a well-structured game, in my opinion, a GM can introduce elements like that and hook them into the way the characters have of solving problems or surviving danger. For example, if you did it in D&D, you could just make it a spell. Easy as that. There's a little room in there for you to be creative as a GM. And in older versions of D&D, you can just make a save against spells, and if you make it, well, you don't get hypnotized.
Yep.
And it's not out of the realm of possibility to find something that counters that within the context of magic items and rules and other spells.
Well, my feeling is this: when I first started GMing, the idea developed over time of the GM kind of you're there to breathe life into a setting and not to just run a game system. And so the game system is there in service to the setting. And so if you're struck by a really interesting and compelling idea, like this guy who can hypnotize people in the manner of this character, then even if player characters don't readily have access to that ability in the books, the GM should just feel free to invent it in some way, within the system or otherwise, and it adds something to the experience. And I feel like over time we moved in the opposite direction, and there's this assumption of total parity between PCs and NPCs and monsters. And there's something good about that. I enjoy aspects of it, but you also can lose some of that creativity when it goes too far. And so I think that being able to, inject these things into the game as a GM freely is important. You just don't want to do it in a way where you're doing it because you're trying to make it hard for the players to do something. Do you know what I mean? That's when I think it becomes...
Yeah, your goal should never be to put something in front of the characters they can't deal with.
Yeah.
But on the note of the whole parity between players and monsters and NPCs and things like that, some of the best parts of RPGs are St. George versus the Dragon, or like a Shadow of the Colossus, little bitty dude versus giant monster. That asymmetrical aspect of challenges is actually really fun and a very classic and important thing that happens in almost every work of fiction. Like even if you go to like the Journey to the West, time and time again, Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, is fighting demons that are these gigantic monsters, and you can't do that if there's one-for-one parity. Of course, in that he can actually turn into a giant monster. Maybe the best example, but you take my meaning. I'm certain. Where if you make St. George into the dragon, it's fine to see the giant monsters fight. That's cool, but it's different than St. George and the Dragon. Yeah. Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla is a different thing.
And I wasn't just talking about parity of power, but parity of access. Like the idea of, well, I'm going to make a magic spell that's really intended for NPCs, not player characters. Do you know what I mean? That kind of a thing. And then again, you can get into some dicey territory there. But I kind of prefer having the door open on that, I guess. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I don't know. But in this case, I think what I'm talking about is the clearly you get struck by this idea of hypnosis, and then just sort of through some kind of management of the rules or through GM fiat, coming up with it existing within the game. And then if the players probe that, so my approach would be I would give it to the guy, but then maybe one of the players says, hey, I want to talk to Elder Pang and learn his hypnosis technique. Then you really got to think about, okay,
you've got to make it something that's player learnable, because theoretically Elder Pang is basically a person like they are, so why couldn't they learn his hypnosis technique?
And so
that's where things get challenging.
And I think every game sort of resolves those kinds of problems differently. One way to sort of handle that stuff, though, is balancing it out. I mean, that's not something that Elder Pang can probably do right in the middle of combat. He needs at least a few moments to kind of catch your attention with some words. And
it functions kind of similar to the charm spell in D&D, where you can't do that while you're fighting. But if you're not fighting, if you have a minute at a table where you're convincing someone they might be poisoned, or if everyone stopped fighting, you just come to offer a few kind words to someone, then you can whip out your magic and start messing with their brains.
Yeah. So I don't think it would be too big a deal to have an ability that almost functions exactly like the one we saw on screen there. And another interesting thing that we saw was the healing technique that they used on Guo Jing, which was he was deeply wounded, but that shows you the value of, for lack of a better term, casting time, because people know what we're talking about here. We're talking about kung fu techniques, but this is sort of the more mystical level of kung fu where they're channeling chi energy, and we see a similar technique used by the Chuanzhen Taoists when they do the star formation, and they sort of, and they even say in the movie, it's based on the same theory as the healing technique that they used.
They draw a line between those two.
And so, but again, just that using using balancers like time, or balancers like making something situation dependent, or requiring multiple people in order to wield. This 7-star formation is powerful, but it takes 7 people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then when one of them dies, the formation is broken.
So, that's what happens. One of them gets killed, and then they're like, "Well, we're toast. You want to kill us? Go ahead. We're going to leave otherwise."
Yeah. So that's a really cool ability, because that's the balance is in the fact that once the formation's broken, that's kind of it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Was there any other gameable stuff that leapt to mind for you?
Whenever the palace guards show up in what is rapidly becoming my favorite scene is when they're stealing the manual behind the waterfall. When the guards show up, I really love it when groups attack really guys that are way out of their league, because I love this idea that that you, as a single person, can take on a huge mass of people, or like a military unit or an army or something like that. I always thought that was really neat. I first learned about that in Exalted 2nd Edition when I was playing that, and the idea sank real deep into my brain. Apparently, it's been around pretty much as long as RPGs have.
Well, and also, here's what's interesting. People often talk about how levels and all this stuff comes from RPGs when they see it in video games and stuff like that, and how things like what you're talking about are present in RPGs. But this stuff is also present in the source material of the movie that we're watching. So if you were to read Return to Condor Heroes, there's a whole section in there where they actually talk about exactly what you're talking about. And one of the main characters breaks it down by the numbers. He's like, this guy is worth 100 soldiers. And and then we see that play out on the battlefield. There's an actual war. And you get to see this is how martial heroes function on the battlefield. This is the role they fill in that kind of scenario.
Almost like living battalions. And actually, point of fact, that's how I designed the war mechanics in my game. I literally every die that you have is a person. A normal person rolls 1 die. So if you have 7 die in your effort pool, you are worth 7 people.
That's really smooth. Thank
you. I know, I'm the man. It's true.
That's a very smooth way of doing it. You would definitely like this, again, I mean, I'm not going to pressure you to read it, but Return of Condor Heroes, I think, would be particularly of interest.
Pressured me, folks. He's doing it.
But especially those battle sequences, because that really gets into this. But also the leveling thing. The characters regularly speak of levels of kung fu training, and there's a point where the villain in Return of Condor Heroes breaks through to the 10th level of this technique that he's trying to master, and he's like conscious of the fact that he's gotten to the 10th level. And so it's something that just sort of, it's interesting because it's a case where the source material actually aligns with a convention within RPGs perfectly.
Like really perfectly, yeah.
Yeah. Where if you and in hindsight, like when I was thinking about it, I was like, man, when I did Return of Condor Heroes 10 should have been the number. Like that should have been the pinnacle, like the profound level. And I missed the boat on it because I just didn't think to connect those two dots. But you can just seamlessly take that kind of leveling thing and port it into any kind of RPG, and it'll function
in a way that the characters comprehend too. Like they might not use the exact numerical terms in like a lot of Western stuff, but they kind of do, because it used to be that there were named levels in D&D, like in the older editions, and you could say, oh, that guy is merely a scoundrel, but that guy is a master thief.
Yep.
And that would describe the difference in their levels and skills, and the characters in the setting would know what they were talking about, kind of the same way that players would be able to talk about them. That's neat.
No, and the thing is, they actually do speak in terms of the numbers. Now, a lot of times, it will normally be around technique, so you might see a guy say, like, the Jade Beauty Fist has 10 levels of mastery, and I am at the 7th, and you're only at the 3rd. You know what I mean? They'll have that kind of,
Those are some of my favorite moments.
And I was even thinking, a good way to like, if I were to like try to make my D20 version of Wuxia now, one way I might do it is I might have every technique be a class, and have an expansive multi-class system. So that you can dive as deeply into each technique as you desire, up to say 10 levels. And I don't know. I thought that would be. I haven't thought about it enough to know if it actually like there might be something hugely obvious I'm overlooking. But every once in a while, like once you've made like a Wuxia game, you sort of think, well, how would I do it now? And that's sort of where I was like last Tuesday, say. And we'll see where I am in October.
It's a novel idea because, like you said, if they can talk about it in terms of levels, that just is wonderful. Because I love when that happens in games, and I've tried to do that in Chang Cheh quite a lot, where the characters talk about things in the same way that players do. It's like, oh, I'm opening this chakra and I'm getting this much prana out of it. That's the thing you could say in and out of character, and it would make sense in either context, and you would know what you were talking about, and it would kind of mean the same thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm getting more magic go-go juice to use my super punch on him. That's what it means.
Yeah, and it's jarring when it goes the other way. Like when you take D&D and novelize it, and then try to have the characters use the terms in a fantasy setting where they don't normally speak that way. Like
that's
like there's a lot of the old TSR novels used to kind of struggle with that. Like it seemed like they were. I don't know what was going on, if there was like a style guide that was constantly changing, but it seemed like there would be times when the characters in certain books would speak in terms of D&D game mechanics and levels and things like that, or character classes.
He's a fighter.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they ever spoke of levels, but they would speak of other things that were very gamey, and it would be kind of like, oh, that's a little interesting. But this is a case where the source material it fits, where it's actually already baked into the source material, so. It's not at all unusual to say, oh, well, he's at the 7th level of, this technique or something.
He's an 8th rank master. Yeah, that's really nice to use.
So it's handy. It's very handy. But yeah, so I don't know. Any other thoughts before we head out?
I'm going to go back to the whole establishing a mini-boss thing just real quick before we head out. Captain Fistomancer. Like I said, he's introduced in the same scene where you learn about what a badass he is, where you learn about what the Fist Sect is at all, that they exist, their allegiance to the Jin Empire, and you get an awesome battle with them. One scene, like one just continuous inflow of information. If you are a GM and you like having mini-bosses strut in and be awesome, watch that scene, the very last scene of this movie, because I've never seen it more concisely and concretely done. It's a total Boba Fett, where they're like, hey, look, that guy over there, total badass. But instead of waiting like a whole movie and a half to see him fail and suck, they condense the whole thing into a single scene, and there's still a great payoff to his fight, and like the stakes are really high. It's awesome. As far as like introducing characters that you want to be badass, do it like they introduced him. Just have them strut in, just basically say, hi, I'm this and that, demonstrate how cool they are, and then if a fight happens, rely on the mechanics. The guy didn't have a huge elaborate story he had to tell. He just was really good at like using his magic fists, and that paid off in a fun way in the fight.
And he's important in the character continues to be important in the story, so we'll see him in the next movie, and also. And here's what's really interesting. Again, I keep bringing this up, but he's a guy you want to watch for because he also is an important character in Return of Condor Heroes. And it's like, okay, what do you just predict? What do you think is going to be this guy's storyline? Like, in the next generation of heroes, when this guy's an old man, where do you think he's going to be? What would your prediction be?
I don't know. I've met him for one scene.
I know, but I'm just curious.
Oh god, bitter old hermit master is a pretty good trope. I guess I'll go with that. Is that what it is?
All right. No, I'm not going to say until it's discovered. But it's just one, again the where he takes characters like this in that next story is always fascinating. So having these conversations before you get there is going to be interesting. So we'll make a point of bringing it up again and seeing if you have the same prediction at the end of the third movie.
We will see. Also, spoiler alert, apparently he survives that movie. Good to know.
Well, okay, so I want to say two things about that. Number one, there might be more to this character than you realize. And number two, movies and books don't always line up 100%. So don't Don't go making assumptions.
I shan't.
But yeah, no, it's in the books. Obviously, yeah, he is continues to be a character, but again, I will say not without an asterisk, and and so but also before we depart, how'd you feel about the new Huang Rong, because it was played by a different actress?
Is it?
Yeah, that was a different actress.
Man, that's some seamless casting.
And what's funny too is they look totally different, but somehow you do not notice the casting change. I think because the personality is nailed by both of them very well.
Yeah, the outfits there, which I think is I was paying more attention to that, and like the smile, that same mischievous smile, both actresses have it.
Yep, and so and I believe this actress continues into the next movie, so they won't make any more changes. But there were a couple of other little actor changes as well, but that was the big one. That's like a pretty important one. Now, inexplicably, when they get to Brave Archer and his mate, the guy who's playing Guo Jing ends up playing the main character of Return of Condor Heroes, and so they have another person playing Guo Jing, which is kind of weird. But
that's weird. But is it like a continuance, like his kid or something like that? Because like, I mean, that would you could do that.
No, because he's actually the Yang is the main character of Return of Condor Heroes, and Yang is Yang Kang's son. So it's which I guess there's another spoiler for you. Yang Kang has a baby, but
that's not a spoiler, I guess.
But yeah, so Yang is the son of Yang Kang and Wu Nancy. So it's which again is a very interesting choice for a character. Your first impulse might be to make the next book about the son of Huang Rong and Guo Jing, or some other character that was you would expect to be the hero. But yeah, so we'll be back again. I think we've covered everything, and I know you have to get back to your dad duties.
Yep, dad it out.
So this Friday we're going to be doing another Alexander Fusheng film, and I think on Wednesday I'm doing episode 5 of I, Claudius with Adam. So we have a lot going on, and hopefully we'll have the third movie. We sort of schedule these things ad hoc depending on what works for us. So I don't know when that's going to be, but it'll probably be sometime soon, and then we're going to be getting into some other things, like we might be doing The Bride with White Hair, or maybe I don't know. We'll talk, but we're going to be doing some other movies. And all right, until then, we will talk to you later.